The Beast of Revelation. There are technically two beasts described in the book of Revelation. The first emerges from the sea and is given great power by the evil dragon. He climbs from the dark abyss to wreak havoc on the world. And then the second beast comes directly out of the earth and actually works kind of like the assistant to the first beast, instructing the men of the world to worship it. One thing that's for certain is that the two beasts we are warned about in the Bible are in direct opposition to God. They are soldiers of the King of Darkness, great and awful monsters who will persecute the saints, influence the kings of the earth, and ready themselves for the great battle of Armageddon. But in the book of Revelation, the beasts don't end up being so tough. Both of them are defeated by Jesus and thrown into the lake of fire. Still, the book of Revelation says that before these beasts are slain, they will torment and influence mankind. The first beast, which rises from the sea, is a terrible thing to behold. It has 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon each horn is a crown. His name is Blasphemy, and he looks like a leopard mixed with a bear and a lion. The beast is so ugly that people won't be able to help but gawk at it in wonder and to follow it. The second beast, the one which comes from the earth and is called the false prophet, is the cleverer one. This is the one the Bible says will force all people to receive the mark of the beast upon their right hand or forehead, thus marking them before the day of judgment. Nebuchadnezzar, the werewolf. King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon, also known as Nebuchadnezzar the Great, was both a major player in the Bible and a real historical figure. He was the second man to rule the Neo-Babylonian Empire, starting at the death of his father in 605 BC until his own death in 562 BC. Historians regard him as the greatest king of all Babylonia, notorious for his successful military campaigns, for the immense construction projects inside the capital of the city of Babylon, and for his impact on Jewish history. But he's also famous because of some obscure passages in the Bible which describe him as transforming into a wolf. The story is really complicated, but the simple version is that the great king of Babylonia got into some trouble with God for his boastfulness. In the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar refused to accept Daniel's God as his own, yet respected that he exists. But respect wasn't good enough for God, and he sent the king a nightmare. God said that if the king did not worship him as was intended, he would become a beast. And in the end, when Nebuchadnezzar refused to worship God, the curse was thrust upon him. The Bible says that his hair grew as long as eagle feathers, his nails became like talons, he ate grass like a cow, and he lived in the forest like a madman. This could very well be the first description of a werewolf transformation in history. There isn't any physical or archaeological evidence that this happened, only the passage in the Bible that claims the king turned into a snarling, hairy beast. Biblical vampires. The most detailed description of a vampire can be found not in the Bible, but in the Sefer Chassidim. For those unaware of what this book is, it's an old text that was written by Judah ben Samuel, describing the religious life of Jewish people in medieval Germany. The book discusses a creature called the Aluka, which was mentioned very briefly in Proverbs, which is in the Bible. In Proverbs, the Aluka is translated to English as horse leech, but biblical scholars say it can actually be translated to bloodlusting monster. The creature in Proverbs was described as having teeth like swords and could never be satisfied with water. The Sefer Chassidim goes into a little more detail. It describes the people of medieval Germany and how they believed in a biblical monster that could shapeshift into a wolf, fly using its own long hair, and only continue to live if it consistently drank human blood. Medieval Germans used to bury the people they thought were vampires with rocks or dirt stuffed in their mouth. That way they wouldn't turn into a demon once they reached hell. Witches and sorceresses. If there's one thing the Bible warns us about, it's witches. There's nothing quite as vilified in the Bible as a woman with supernatural powers. Witches are mentioned so frequently, it's impossible to read the book and miss the point. The Bible explicitly condemns all types of spiritualism that don't directly relate to God. Any witch who contacts the spirits, any sorceress who thinks she can practice magic, and any medium trying to see into the future is labeled by the Bible a monster. Not only does the Bible condemn witchcraft and those who practice it, it condones murdering them. Exodus 22:18 says, "Do not allow a sorceress to live." That's pretty straightforward. Then there's Leviticus 20:31 that says, "A man or woman who is a medium or spiritist must be put to death. You are to stone them." The Bible literally wants people to take any woman who practices any kind of spirituality and throw rocks at them until they're dead. The most famous witch in the Bible is probably Queen Jezebel from the Old Testament. She was the wife of Ahab, king of Israel, and was infamously vain and narcissistic. She wanted only the finest things in life and convinced her husband to turn away from the one true God and worship the old gods of Mesopotamia, Baal and Asherah. She was also a sorceress who practiced magic. To punish Queen Jezebel, God made sure she was thrown out of a window, trampled by a horse, and then eaten by stray dogs. Jesus the Ghost. In the New Testament version of the Bible, there is virtually nothing said about ghosts or spirits from another dimension. But there is one reference in Matthew 14:26 to be exact, when the disciples of Jesus witnessed him walking on water and thought he was a ghost and cried out in fear. Clearly, people from 2,000 years ago believed ghosts walked among us. And then there's another passage in Luke in which Jesus says to look at his hands and his feet and to touch him and see. Since a ghost does not have flesh and bones, but he does, that means he is not a ghost. The old style of English isn't the clearest, but it seems that Jesus at no point denies the existence of ghosts. In the Bible, he simply claims that he's not a ghost, but he doesn't deny their existence, and that's really the key part. But then if we go back even further to the Old Testament, we can see the story of King Saul. The king was having some serious trouble with the Philistines, so he summoned the ghost of the prophet Samuel to help him. In the Old Testament, the spirit is described as coming up from the ground, and King Saul actually lies on the ground to better speak with the ghost through the dirt. The consensus here is that the Bible teaches there are indeed spirits. There are spirits just like there are angels and demons. But fortunately for everyone, the Bible doesn't say anything about hauntings. The fire-breathing Leviathan. In the Bible's book of Job, there is a long and obvious description of a fire-breathing dragon. Job is talking about a horrifying beast called Leviathan. He says that when it sneezes, it flashes light, its eyes are as red as the dawn, lightning leaps from its mouth, flames of fire flash from its tongue, and streams of smoke billow out from its nostrils like steam from a pot. Its breath is like kindled coals, and flames burst from its mouth. That's about as good of a description of a dragon as a person can make. The Leviathan is even described as having tremendous strength, as striking terror into the hearts of people wherever it goes, and having flesh so firm and hard it can't be penetrated. That sounds an awful lot like impenetrable dragon scales. But what purpose does this Leviathan have? It's actually supposed to be a sea serpent, a demon connected to the deadly sin of envy. It's an embodiment of chaos, and it hungers for the souls of the damned. Some historians believe the great biblical dragon might have been inspired by the Canaanite monster called Lotan, which also happened to be a lot like a dragon. The Locusts. One of the nastiest monsters in the Bible is the locust, or rather a plague of locusts. But these are no ordinary insects. In the book of Revelation, after the fifth angel sounds his trumpet and a star falls from the sky to the earth, the abyss is opened and a calamity unlike any other befalls mankind. Smoke bursts from the abyss as if from a gigantic furnace. The sun and the sky are darkened, and a swarm of terrifying locusts descends upon the earth. These locusts are horrifying. They're described as both looking like scorpions and looking like horses prepared for battle. The locusts have hair like women's hair, and their teeth are as big as lion fangs. They wear breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings is like the thundering chariots going into battle. But they also have great big tails that can sting like scorpion tails, and each sting causes pain lasting up to 5 months. When these locusts come to humanity, it's all part of the apocalypse. They are given the order not to kill people, but to torture them beyond agony for approximately 5 months. In those months, men will be tormented so fiercely by the plague of locusts that they will seek death, but will be unable to find it. The Nephilim. The Nephilim are supposedly the offspring of human women and male giants. These creatures are discussed in the book of Genesis, along with a lot of non-canonical writings. The issue with the Nephilim is that they are only touched on briefly in the official scripture. It's only in the non-canonical stuff that more detailed descriptions of these gigantic beasts and their parents can be found. And for that reason, interpretations vary dramatically from one religious group to the next. Some believe the Nephilim descended from Seth, Adam's third son, and some say they're descendants of Cain, Adam's first son. But by far the most intriguing theory is that the Nephilim were born of angels and the daughters of Adam and Eve, because in Genesis, that's kind of what it says. The Bible says that when men began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of heaven took many of them as their own wives. The Nephilim were then born, and they became heroes of old and men of renown. This is quite interesting because it seems to describe the Nephilim not as terrible beasts or ugly monsters, but as heroes. And yet, when you look at interpretations of this passage in the Bible, most people say the Nephilim were tainted offspring, as the angels were twisted by their lust for human women and fathered monstrosities. Then, after the Nephilim began to walk the earth, God was forced to flood it, and thereby reset society to rid the world of the abominations. The Four Horsemen. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse are some of the scariest creatures the Bible has to offer. These figures appear in the book of Revelation and are described by John of Patmos as part of his vision of the end of the world. In Revelation, God's right hand holds a scroll sealed with 7 seals. He gives this scroll to the Lamb of God, also known as Jesus Christ, and the seals are opened one by one. With the opening of each of the first 4 seals, one of the horsemen is loosed upon the planet. The first horseman comes in on a white horse and is interpreted as one of either 3 things. The white horseman is either Jesus Christ, the Antichrist, or pestilence. Nobody can seem to decide, but many scholars have stuck with pestilence since it fits in with the rest of the horsemen. So the first horseman brings great sickness and disease to the world, and then the second horseman comes on his red horse with his great sword and plunges the world into conflict and strife. With nations at war and the people stricken by disease, the third horseman on his black horse comes to release famine. Now there's no food, and everybody's starving. Finally, the fourth horseman on his pale steed comes as death. He comes to kill a quarter of the humans not already dead, and he's accompanied by the Greek god Hades. Hades follows behind death on his pale horse, his mouth wide and swallowing the souls of all those taken by death. The Behemoth. The Behemoth is described by Job as a great and terrible beast of unfathomable size and unparalleled strength. What's interesting is that in the Bible, Job seems to be familiar with the unstoppable and fearless creature. It's described as a plant-eater, it lives near water, and it's rippling with muscles. None can hunt the Behemoth, it can't be captured, and some believe it might be a dinosaur. It's important to mention that the Behemoth from the Bible, along with the Leviathan, don't play any kind of significant role in the narrative. God simply points out the 2 mightiest creatures in the world to help Job remember his place as a small and insignificant human. We know the Leviathan is described as a dragon and the Behemoth kind of as its land equivalent. And while historians say the Behemoth was probably supposed to be either a hippopotamus or a rhinoceros, it may have instead been a dinosaur. Because Christians don't typically believe that dinosaurs existed millions of years ago, and instead were created by God near the same time that He created man, they believe dinos and humans coexisted. Many religious people think the Behemoth was either a diplodocus or an apatosaurus. The Demon Pazuzu. Pazuzu is thought to be one of the oldest demons in the world. He was an Assyrian-Babylonian god who was respected from around 1000 BC to 1 BC. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Pazuzu was famous as the son of the king of demons of the underworld, Hanbi, and brother to Humbaba, who was killed by the heroes. Pazuzu was considered a demon of the underworld, master of the winds, and bringer of famine during the dry season. In the rainy season, Pazuzu was responsible for causing brutal storms and sending plagues of locusts to devastate crops. He was a destructive demon, and yet he was also considered the only possible defense against the very forces he controlled. So, pretty double-edged sword. He created storms but was the only one who could stop them. He sent a plague and was the only one to get rid of it. This was a fairly common belief when it came to demons in the ancient world prior to Christianity, and the Egyptians had similar thoughts. They recognized demons as bringers of destruction and also as salvations against it. Prayers were said in the name of Pazuzu as a way of satisfying the demon and stopping him from bringing calamity down on the people. These days, Pazuzu is likely the only demon from ancient Mesopotamia most people have heard of. He was depicted as the demon who possesses the little girl in the Exorcist movie from 1973, and even though Pazuzu was directly linked to the forces of Christianity in the film, he was around long before the Christian devil ever took center stage as the primary force of evil in the world. Archangel Gabriel. Archangel Gabriel is one of the most important of God's trusted messengers. He is the angel of revelation because in many religions God chooses Gabriel to communicate important messages or do the heavy lifting, in other words. He is also a guardian and protector, sometimes shown as a warrior angel with a sword, slaying beasts and demons. He is also one of the only angels that has a prominent place in every single Abrahamic religion. Gabriel revealed the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad, and he is mentioned in the book of Daniel, the New Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and the Jewish Talmud. Throughout several different faiths, Gabriel has the important task of announcing God's will to the most important of the prophets. He appears to Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, making him a symbol of God and a personification of his word. Gabriel is the angel who appears to the founders of the three main Abrahamic faiths: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. In Christianity, Gabriel has a lot of important roles to play. He visits Mary to reveal that she will give birth to the Son of God, and in the book of Revelation, Gabriel is the angel who blows the horn to announce that Judgment Day has come. In modern Catholicism, Saint Gabriel the Archangel is the patron saint of communications and has a feast day on September 29th. Gabriel's story is different the further we stray from the source material. In the Latter-day Saint theology, Gabriel was a mortal who went under the name Noah. After Noah died, he was resurrected to become the angel Gabriel, meaning all of his children are considered to be angelic offspring. Beelzebub. The world of demonology and Christianity is extremely complex. One of the biggest issues is the difference between what was originally written in the first versions of the Bible and all the adaptations that came after. Beelzebub is typically used as another name for Satan. However, in more recent demonology terms, Beelzebub is one of the 7 princes of hell. Surprisingly, most of the demons we are familiar with today were created over the past 2,000 years as extra characters to flesh out Christian lore. Almost all the most notorious Christian demons, from Belial to Asmodeus, did not appear in the Bible itself, but came from the history of other ancient civilizations. Beelzebub was originally a word that means Lord of the Flies, and in Hebrew literature the name can be translated to Lord of Filth or Lord of Dung. Beelzebub is depicted in ancient images as a fly or a bug, and scholars believe his name has likely lived on through the millennia as some sort of god related to dirty and filth. In Christian tradition, he is high up in the hierarchy of hell. 16th century occultist Johann Weyer believed that Beelzebub led a revolt against the devil and was the chief lieutenant of Lucifer. Johann Weyer was a very interesting figure who was a physician and demonologist. He was among one of the first people to publish works against the persecution of witches. Beelzebub is a false god in the Old Testament, the patron saint of the Philistine city of Ekron. He was most likely once the god Baal, but his name was transformed and ruined over the years, until much later in the New Testament it was synonyms for Satan. Angel of the Abyss. Abadin is one of the only angels that makes an appearance in the New Testament. However, his mention is brief and can only be found in the book of Revelation. His name, which can also be pronounced Apollyon, translates roughly to destruction. And while you may have heard the name Abadin associated with Satan, he is never represented as being the devil. He's the Lord of the Abyss and will be responsible for the plague of locusts that will terrorize humanity at the end of days. Depending on which religious scripture you're reading, Abadin is very different. In the Hebrew Bible, he isn't an angel or a demon, but simply a name for a bottomless pit filled with the souls of the dead. In the book of Revelation, Abadin is the leader of the army of Locusts, an angel summoned by God after the fifth seal is opened and the fifth trumpet is blown. Abadin is responsible for opening the pit, releasing the Locusts, and allowing them to torment everyone on the planet who does not believe in God. These are no ordinary Locusts either. They are described in Revelation as looking more like horses with human faces, teeth like a lion, long hair and the tail of a scorpion, with a poisonous stinger. These are terrifying creatures that will be some of the last things on Earth during the days of the apocalypse. What's interesting about Abadin is that some say he's a demon while others say he's an angel, but the symbolism in Revelation is pretty clear. Abadin, although his job might be horrible and he lives in a dark abyss, is indeed an angel of God and not of Satan. He's a representative of God whose job it is to help usher in the end of all things. Asteroth. Asteroth in the world of demonology is one of the highest-ranking demons in Hell. The unholy trinity, or the Dukes of Hell, are composed of Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Asteroth. If we go back to the New Testament, we won't find any mention of this vague and obscure demon. Many historians believe Asteroth came from the Phoenician goddess Astarte, who was worshipped as the goddess of love, war, and justice. Her worship was likely quite strong in the days of the Canaanite people, when the first chapters of the Old Testament were written. It's only in the Hebrew Bible that a place called Ashtaroth Karnaim is mentioned. Just like the city of Athens was named after the goddess Athena, the ancient city of Ashtaroth was likely named after the goddess Astarte. In the Hebrew Bible, the city was the location of a great battle between King Kedorlaomer and the Rephaim, and in the book of Judges there's a passage discussing how the Hebrew people were putting aside their Baals and Ashtaroths, or in other words, discarding their foreign gods. It was from these old passages and the ancient history of Phoenicia that Asteroth was adopted into demonology in the 16th century. He first appeared in the False Monarchy of Demons published in 1577, working alongside Lucifer and Beelzebub to rule over the dominion of Hell. Archangel Raphael. Archangel Raphael is arguably the most benevolent of all of God's angels. He is the angel of healing, a being of pure compassion for those who struggle with physical and mental issues, and even those troubled emotionally and spiritually. Raphael's duty is to bring people closer to God and to heal their wounds. In the world of addictions, Raphael is the singular angel that people pray to for guidance and help out of their despair. In ancient religious texts, Raphael is mostly depicted as a healer. In the Book of Tobit, an official part of the Bible, he restores sight to the blind, heals people spiritually and emotionally, and drives away a demon of lust after it torments a woman named Sarah. And in Islamic tradition, Raphael is also the master of music who sings his praise of God in over 1,000 languages. Often in artworks, Raphael is depicted holding either a staff, which represents healing, or an emblem known as a caduceus that symbolizes the medical profession. There are also times where the archangel is illustrated with a fish, which refers to a biblical story where he uses a part of the marine animal to cure a man's blindness. In the Book of Enoch, which was not an official part of the Bible, Archangel Raphael is tasked with healing the world after the fallen angels corrupted it by procreating with human women. Anywhere that he's mentioned, he's described as the healer of Earth's evil and afflictions. Gadriel. Just like how some demons were created after the original Bible, there are some angels who appear not in the canonical scripture, but in myth and in the forbidden books. In the non-canonical biblical text, the Book of Enoch, the angel Gadriel is mentioned. The angel's name doesn't come up anywhere in the official Bible, only in these fringe texts. One of the biggest themes of the Book of Enoch is demonology and the origin of the Nephilim, which are first mentioned in Genesis. According to the Book of Enoch, Gadriel was one of the 200 Grigori, or the angelic watchers, who fought alongside Satan during the rebellion against God. Gadriel was one of the leaders of these rebellious angels, and was among the first to enter into intimate relations with human women. That made Gadriel one of the first fathers of the Nephilim, the abominable giants who lived during the antediluvian times. The Nephilim were so abhorrent that God was forced to wipe the earth clean with his great flood. Adramelech. In the Book of Kings, Adramelech is mentioned only briefly as a Semitic god. He was worshipped by the citizens of Sepharvaim, a city captured by Sargon II, king of Assyria. In the Bible, the people of this Assyrian city are described as heathens, worshippers of the false god to whom they gave great blood sacrifices. They burned their children alive as glorious offerings to Adramelech, their barbarian deity. However, Adramelech was only one pagan god, as there were many others worshipped by the people of Mesopotamia. He has been closely associated with another terrifying entity from Mesopotamia called Baal, which was also a horrifying god who demanded children for his sacrifices. As the years went by, both Baal and Adramelech transformed from being powerful gods worshipped by the Mesopotamians to being demons in hell. Adramelech is a demon in many Christian traditions, a fallen angel beside the likes of Asmodeus, who was ultimately vanquished by the archangels Uriel and Raphael. In more obscure modern demonology, Adramelech has been downgraded all the way to supervisor of Satan's wardrobe. He's usually seen in artwork as a creature with the head of a donkey, the torso of a human, and the tail of a peacock. Choronzon. Choronzon is one of the strangest demons you've most likely never heard of. This demonic monster did not take form until the 16th century, created by the insane occultists John Dee and Edward Kelly. Dee claimed that all of his mystical knowledge was given to him by angels who revealed themselves in a vision. He is also credited as being the creator of Enochian magic. Dee was an important figure in the 16th century. He was not only a mathematician and astronomer, but also an alchemist and a firm believer in the occult. He was the advisor to Elizabeth I and spent the majority of his time researching ancient magical texts and dabbling in divination. Choronzon, the chaos demon, was originally mentioned in one of Dee's mad scribblings. However, Choronzon wouldn't become a truly frightening force of evil until Aleister Crowley in the 20th century. As you may already know, Crowley was considered the worst man on earth at that time, as he was busy founding the highly controversial Thelma religion. Crowley made huge waves in England up until his death in 1947 and is famous for his wacky attempts at summoning demons and trying to bring the devil out of hell. One of his favorite demons was Choronzon, the Dweller of the Abyss. The demon was said to be the last thing standing between a person and their enlightenment. The only way for a Thelemite to reach enlightenment was to fight through the chaos of Choronzon's abyss and come out unscathed on the other side. Crowley supposedly tried to summon Choronzon in Algeria in December of 1909. The Angel of Peace. Shamuel is known as the Angel of Peace. He's traditionally connected to the unconditional love of God, the search for inner peace and conflict resolution. He's also the angel of romantic love and is typically sought by those looking to come to terms with their own relationships in life. In traditional Christian art, Archangel Shamuel is generally depicted with heart symbols. In the religious texts, Shamuel is nowhere to be found. He isn't mentioned by name in a single major religious text in either the Jewish or Christian traditions, and yet both of these faiths have identified him as carrying out major missions for God. He was the angel who comforted Adam and Eve after the angel Jophiel kicked them out of the Garden of Eden, and Shamuel also comforted Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane before the crucifixion. The only place Shamuel seems to be mentioned by name is in the Kabbalah, the esoteric school of Jewish mysticism. In the Kabbalah, Shamuel is one of 10 angels of God, but how he made his way into popular Christian culture is something of a mystery. Biblical giants. As far as scientists are concerned, nobody in the 21st century has ever seen a biblical giant with their own eyes. However, there is evidence that has been discovered in Israel that suggests these beings lived during the days of the Bible. The Nephilim are described in the Bible as the sons of fallen angels and the daughters of men. When the angels saw how alluring the human females were, they couldn't help themselves and began breeding with them. The offspring of the unnatural union were called Nephilim, giants that walked the face of the earth. They were said to be so terrible that God sent a flood to kill everything on the planet and wipe the slate clean. The Nephilim supposedly stood much taller than ordinary humans, but were otherwise quite similar. If they were to be found in the archaeological record, the only difference would be that they had much larger bones than us. In the Book of Enoch, these giants supposedly lived on Mount Hermon in Israel. Coincidentally, that was the same place where the biblical king Og rose up to fight the Israelites. Og was allegedly buried underneath a mysterious rock formation called the Wheel of the Giants. It is a series of concentric rings with a large mound in the center covering a mysterious hidden chamber. In Deuteronomy, Og was the only remaining man from the days before the flood, other than Noah and his family. It's taught in the Jewish tradition that he survived by clinging to the side of the ark as a stowaway. It's been said that Og was a giant who slept in a bed over 14 feet, 4 meters long. Unfortunately, his bones have not technically been found or documented, but many Christian scholars believe the Wheel of the Giants is the burial place of the last Nephilim. Biblical visions. At the Out-of-Body Experience Research Center in Los Angeles, scientists believe they have established a scientific reason behind visions of angels and other biblical encounters, specifically the ones that are discussed in the Bible. 30 volunteers were instructed on how to have out-of-body experiences. They were given instructions on what to do mentally upon waking in the middle of the night or becoming lucid just after a dream or nightmare. These procedures were supposed to culminate in bizarre experiences that could be perceived as encounters with heavenly beings. 15 out of the 30 volunteers experienced such encounters. The volunteers who reported visions of angels were told to recreate the story of Elijah from the Bible. Elijah goes into the wilderness and falls asleep beneath a tree, exhausted and ready to die. Just before he slips away, an angel wakes Elijah and tells him to eat. When he wakes from his vision, Elijah finds a loaf of bread and a jug of water. The researchers figured this biblical passage would be the best for sleepers to have a vision of their own. Surprisingly, 9 of the subjects dreamed of meeting an angel and eating food, while the other 6 only dreamed of encountering an angel. The scientists are now claiming that every encounter with an angel described in the Bible was likely the result of an extremely lucid dream and a man with a pad of paper nearby. Encounter with the devil. There was a nun who lived in the 17th century and may have had a frightening encounter with the biggest villain in the Bible. Her name was Sister Maria Crocifissa della Concessione, and she lived in Sicily in the late 1600s when she was supposedly possessed by Lucifer himself. Maria was born in 1645 and entered the Benedictine convent at Parma de Montechiaro when she was only 15 years old. In the year 1676, she woke up one morning covered in ink with a mysterious letter written in an indecipherable language sitting in front of her. When her sisters at the convent asked her what happened, she said she was possessed by Satan, Lord of Hell, and that he had forced her hand into writing the message. This may sound like the premise of some B-rated horror movie, but it's 100% true. The letter is still around to this day and was only recently deciphered, 940 years later, thanks to a group of Italian computer scientists. A team from the Ludum Science Center used a new program to do the decoding. The scientists loaded all the languages Sister Maria may have known into the program, and the letter turned out to be a bizarre mixture of characters from Latin and even runic Greek. The letter describes the Holy Trinity as dead weights. It says God was invented by man, and it finishes off by saying God and his religion are a failed system that worked for no one. They believe Maria likely suffered from schizophrenia, which is why she wrote the strange letter. Others believe the bizarre ramblings are proof she really was possessed by the devil, the Leviathan. The Leviathan is described in the Bible as an incredible beast, a sea creature with a serpentine nature. The Leviathan was not a sea serpent, but a terrifying animal with a powerful neck and sharp teeth that exhaled smoke from its nostrils like a seething cauldron. Researchers believe the Leviathan in the Bible may have been an extinct species of serpent-like whale called the Basilosaurus. The remains of this creature were discovered at the Wadi al-Hitan site in southwest Egypt. In English, the place is called the Valley of the Whales. It's a dry wasteland where giant skeletons of ancient extinct whales can be seen poking out of the sand. The whole area was once a sea, but that sea is gone, and thousands of years of wind has slowly revealed the bones of the dead marine monsters. Some of these beasts were Basilosaurus, creatures that could grow to be an estimated 70 feet, 21 meters in length. They were apex predators and looked like underwater dragons. Biblical scholars believe that passages from the book of Job can be connected directly to the Valley of Whales. When the ancient Egyptians came across this place in the desert and saw the crushed bones of sea monsters lying in the dust, they interpreted them as real monsters. They became Leviathans and were assumed to have been squashed by God or devastated following some catastrophic drought. Another theory is that Leviathan was a blanket term for all whales, creatures Job and others would have been able to see in the ocean. Ronald Hhunkler and a meeting with demons. Ronald Hhunkler had a terrifying encounter with demons in 1949, and priests performed an exorcism on the young boy 70 years ago. It was a harrowing ordeal that would become the inspiration for the famous book, The Exorcist. This biblical encounter began in Washington, D.C., when 13-year-old Ronald learned how to use a Ouija board with help from his beloved Aunt Harriet. After his aunt passed away, Ronald began to experience strange things. He heard scratching coming from the floors and from the walls, his mattress randomly moved, and he began to show signs of psychological issues. Ronald's family was desperate to help the boy, so they consulted everyone from their doctor to a psychiatrist. They also spoke with their minister, who was worried about demonic possession, and he suggested that the family seek out the help of the Jesuits. In February of 1949, the church granted Father E. Albert Hughes permission to perform an exorcism. The Catholic priest strapped the boy to his mattress and began the process, but Ronald broke free and attacked the priest, leaving the ritual unfinished. The family then moved to St. Louis, where 2 Jesuits agreed to try again with an exorcism. They believed the boy was possessed by 10 demons, not just one. It took night after night of repeatedly performing the exorcism until finally, the priests broke through. The boy snapped back to reality, saying that he had a vision of Saint Michael defeating Satan on the battlefield. Thankfully, that was the end of Ronald's demonic possession. But whether he truly did have demons living inside of him or not, nobody will ever know. Do you think demonic possession is possible, or do you think there are other explanations to explain the symptoms? Let us know in the comments, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button, the snake with legs. After the serpent persuades Eve to taste the forbidden fruit, and Eve convinces Adam to eat it as well, they all get in trouble from God. Adam and Eve are banished, and God curses the serpent to crawl on its belly and eat dirt for the rest of its life. This seems fairly normal until you scrutinize the passage and realize it implies that before the event, the serpent had legs. This is an often overlooked passage in the book of Genesis. In 2019, scientists from Argentina discovered a fossilized ancestor of modern snakes that once had legs. This seems to back up the idea that God cursed snakes to no longer have their limbs. The weird thing is that the fossils are 100 million years old. That means they predate the Bible by a significant amount of time. However, scientists say that snakes likely lost their front legs millions of years before their hind legs. It's possible that in the era the Bible was written, there were still some remaining snakes floundering around with 2 stubby hind legs. Chariots in the sky. In the book of Revelations, Zechariah has a vision of the apocalypse. At one point he describes witnessing chariots of fire streaming out from the clouds. These chariots were made of solid iron and bronze, and were led by red, black, and white horses. In the year 66 AD, Roman Emperor Josephus had a similar vision. He supposedly saw with his own eyes an army in the clouds, metallic chariots blazing across the sky. Shortly after the emperor saw these mysterious things in the heavens, he attacked Jerusalem and burned their great temple to the ground. Emperor Josephus was hardly the only person in the ancient world to see something strange in the sky and interpret it as the chariots of God. And there has been a long debate as to whether these fiery chariots were divine prophecy or extraterrestrial visitors. NASA scientist Richard Stothers believes that with the introduction of the Bible, people in the 1st century began to interpret extraterrestrial encounters as having divine visions from God. These people thought they were seeing God's will or his army of angels hiding in the clouds, when really they may have been seeing alien ships hovering in the sky. Biblical unicorn. One of the creatures mentioned in the Bible is the unicorn. Strangely, it's discussed in casual conversation with the likes of lions and goats. In the book of Job, unicorns are not mythical beasts or things from legend, but very real animals that walked alongside humans. New archaeological evidence has shown that humans may have seen unicorns in the days the Bible was written. Biblical authors could have been some of the last people who physically sighted unicorns before they went extinct. In Kazakhstan, researchers found the skull of a creature that looked like a rhino mixed with a horse. The creature has been dubbed the Siberian unicorn, and its skull was dated at just 29,000 years old. Before this skull was discovered, scientists believed the Siberian unicorn went extinct 350,000 years ago. Keep in mind that the real unicorn didn't look anything like what we know from fairy tales, and it wasn't a beautiful white steed with a golden horn. Instead, it was a furry horse-like beast with a giant rhino horn sticking out of its forehead. And although this particular specimen is 29,000 years old, it's likely not when it went extinct. The creature, which was roughly 6 feet, 1.8 meters tall, and 9,000 pounds, 4,082 kilograms, may have lived until just recently. If the authors of the Bible wrote about the creature as though they themselves had seen it, there's a high probability that they did. The Angel and the Senator. In 2013, Illinois Senator Mark Kirk claimed that he encountered 3 angels. The Republican senator said he was visited by these beings while recovering from a stroke. The angels stood at the foot of his bed in Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago and asked if he wanted to go with them. However, Mark told them no and said that he wasn't done living on Earth yet. According to Mark's surgeon, Dr. Richard Fessler, the senator's brain functions were completely normal at the time he supposedly encountered the angels. His thought process was normal, and his mental state was perfectly fine. Mark is now one of the 8 million Americans who believe to have physically seen with their own eyes angelic messengers from heaven. Like all 8 million of these alleged sightings, there is no possible way to confirm or deny what they saw, and there has been no definitive proof ever captured on camera. The Rooster Snake. The cockatrice, a rooster and snake hybrid from medieval mythology, is one of the strangest creatures mentioned in the King James Version of the Old Testament. The cockatrice is mentioned multiple times, usually brought up as some kind of punishment. For example, Jeremiah 8:17 says, "For behold, I will send cockatrices among you, and they shall bite you." It was described as a weird animal born from the egg of a chicken, but with the wings of a bat, the tail of a snake, and the legs and head of a rooster. In the small English village of Whirlwool, one of these biblical monsters allegedly terrorized the citizens in the Middle Ages. A duck supposedly laid an egg, which was then hatched by a toad, and the creature that was born grew to be a monster. It looked like a miniature dragon and was cared for by the villagers, who were curious about the creature until it grew so big it started killing them. Whether the cockatrice or some other mutant creature terrorized the village, we will never know. However, the legend is very real, and it bothered the locals so much that until the 1930s, they supposedly refused to eat duck eggs. Do you think ancient angel sightings were really just UFOs in the sky? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.